The father of British hostage John Cantley calls on Islamic State captors to release his son. From his hospital bed, Paul Cantley sets aside his frailty to appeal for an end to his detention.
I can think of no greater joy than seeing him again.
Also tonight, the Tory threat to scrap human rights judgments handed down from Europe.
The suspects accused of murdering 2 British tourists are forced to recreate the crime.
And driven out of Argentina, the BBC Top Gear team in trouble again.
This is ITV News at 6:30 with Natasha Kaplinsky and Mark Austin.
Hello, good evening. The hospitalised father of kidnapped British journalist John Cantley has made a direct appeal to Islamic State to release his son. Appearing on camera and struggling to speak after a tracheostomy, Paul Cantley said John is a good man who is only trying to help the people of Syria.
He spoke of his great relief at seeing pictures of his son for the first time since he was captured nearly 2 years ago. But the videos released by IS, he said, left a feeling of despair and helplessness. Juliet Bremner heard Paul Cantley's appeal.
As head of the family, Paul Cantley has chosen to address Islamic State. Speaking from his hospital bed, the 81-year-old struggles to make himself understood after undergoing a tracheotomy. But he seems determined to complete this appeal for his son's life.
I want John to know how very proud I am of him. I can think of no greater joy than seeing him again. Released and allowed to return to those that love him.
This video, released 2 weeks ago, was the first proof the family had received that John was alive after 2 years as a hostage.
Hello, my name is John Cantley. I'm a British journalist who used to work for some of the bigger newspapers and magazines in the UK.
It was the first of 3 propaganda videos he was forced to deliver. Now the family's decided it must try and speak to those holding him.
I ask you, from all that is sacred, to help us and allow him to return home safely and to those he loves and who love him.
His family are keenly aware that the 43-year-old was kidnapped alongside James Foley, the American journalist who's already been murdered. They want to stress that he was only there to help the Syrian people by documenting their plight.
Juliet, how are the Islamic State likely to respond to this video?
The honest answer is we don't know, but what we do know is that they are very media savvy, very media conscious. We've seen many examples of that. We know, of course, they put out those horrific videos of hostages being murdered, and John Cantley himself is being used by them to put out their message. But there's no evidence that they respond to this kind of public direct appeal. We saw the family of Alan Henning just earlier this week, Barbara Henning, his wife, making a similar sort of appeal. But we know they have privately sent her some material, apparently an audio tape of him begging for his life. The Cantley family don't appear to have had any kind of response to their private appeals to them, so they've decided to go ahead and make this much more direct public appeal. I suppose they must know, though, that with an organisation like IS, who just see kidnapping as routine, almost part of their armoury, this really has to be very much a last-ditch attempt.
Juliet, thank you.
Conservative plans to stop British laws being overruled by human rights judgments from Europe came in for criticism today. The party's own former Attorney General said the idea was not properly thought through. But Chris Grayling, the Justice Secretary, insists his pledge to introduce a British rights bill is viable and legal. Our political correspondent Romilly Weeks has more.
From halting the deportation of radical clerics to supporting prisoners' rights to vote, they're judgments that have infuriated the press and public.
With a Conservative government after the next election, this country will have a new British Bill of Rights to be passed in our Parliament, rooted in our values, and as for Labour's Human Rights Act, we will scrap it once and for all.
The Tories promised to do something about it. Their plan, if they win the election, UK courts and Parliament will have the final say, not the European Court of Human Rights.
We have the best judges and the best courts, in my view, in the world. I'm entirely confident that with these changes that put legal decisions, ultimate legal decisions, back into the hands of our Supreme Court, that we will be providing proper human rights protection for the people of this country.
All countries in Europe, apart from Belarus, abide by the rulings of the European Court of Human Rights. Most famously in the UK, it blocked the deportation of the radical cleric Abu Qatada, but it also held the Russian government to account for human rights abuses in Chechnya, for example, and the Bosnian government for discriminating against Jews and Roma. And out of 1,600 applications lodged against the UK last year, British courts were overruled in just 8 cases.
Occasionally we're found to have been in breach, but it's not often. And when we are found in breach, for example, it ended torture in Northern Ireland, it allowed gay people to join the army, it allowed people of faith to wear the symbol of their faith when they're going about their business. I think most people think those are important.
Currently, British courts can be overruled by the European Court of Human Rights. Under the plans, the court in Strasbourg would be reduced to little more than an advisory body. Its rulings only binding if MPs here voted in support of them. A move, say the Tories, to restore the sovereignty of the British Parliament.
But even some senior Tories doubt that could work.
What we'd be asking is to have a special rule for us while every other country observes the old rule of undertaking to implement a judgment. Now I don't think that's realistic, and the truth is it will do immense damage to the very substantial amount of good that the Convention has been doing, particularly in raising human rights standards.
The Conservatives are banking that the idea will go down as well with the wider electorate as it did at their conference, but it's a move that sets them up for another big battle in Europe. Romilly Weeks, ITV News, Westminster.
Well, the Prime Minister made a flying visit to Afghanistan today, his last before British troops leave in 3 months' time. He said Britain has gone a long way to achieving its objectives and promised the new Afghan president his ongoing support. From Afghanistan, our international affairs editor Raghi Omar reports.
Camp Bastion has been the place where hundreds of wounded British soldiers were treated, and has been the place from where those who lost their lives made their final journey back to Britain. Today, David Cameron came to speak to the remaining troops himself.
Let us make sure we remember all those that have served and have fallen, and all those who were wounded.
At its height, during the war in Helmand province, Bastion was a garrison the size of Aldershot. In its final weeks, it feels like a ghost town, a shadow of itself, emblematic of a war coming to an end for British servicemen and women. What for you has been the most poignant memory from Bastion that's captured the scale of the sacrifice here?
The most poignant memory has always been looking at the names inscribed on the wall and seeing those who have fallen and recognising that we have paid a very high price. Look, I think the work here, though, has been very, very important.
Within the next few weeks, there will be nothing left of Camp Bastion, and the remaining British combat troops here will have gone home. But that doesn't mean that the conflict is coming to an end for the Afghan National Army, who will now have to pick up the fight against the Taliban and the extremist militants left in this country. And the question is, are they up to it? We travelled with the Prime Minister to the capital Kabul, still a place of danger and instability, but with signs of political progress. He met the leaders of Afghanistan's first ever government to come to power through a peaceful transfer of power. But if this government runs into trouble, just as Iraq's did, will British troops be coming back?
We're not going to send combat troops back to Afghanistan because we have trained up an efficient and effective Afghan National Army and Afghan National Police Force in order to provide that security that Afghanistan needs, but also that we need in our country.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister.
With British troops leaving by the end of this year, there is a sense of fragility here about what the future holds, with questions still being asked about whether the Afghan security forces will be able to take on the fight alone by the end of this year. Raghi Omar, ITV News, Afghanistan.
Police investigating the murder of 2 young British tourists on a Thai beach have staged an extraordinary reconstruction of the crime.
Surrounded by officers and still handcuffed, the 2 Burmese migrants who supposedly admitted the killings showed a crowd exactly how they did it. Duncan Golestani has more.
Wearing flak jackets and helmets to protect them from the watching crowd, the 2 Burmese workers gave a scene-by-scene reenactment of the night they killed 2 British backpackers. It was bizarre, even by the standards of this much criticised investigation. First, they sat with a guitar to demonstrate how they spent the evening before they spotted their victims. Then 2 volunteers pretended to be the backpackers strolling along the beach, arms around one another. Finally, crouching down, the 2 men used a dustpan to show officers how they carried out the attack. David Miller had been drowned, Hannah Witheridge had been sexually assaulted. Both had severe head injuries. After being criticised for failing to seal off the crime scene and allowing suspects to leave the holiday island, Thai police have been under intense pressure to solve the case. The chief of police confirmed DNA links the 2 men to the attacks, but human rights groups are questioning their confessions, saying the migrant workers have had no access to lawyers. Police deny making the pair scapegoats. On Jersey, the family and friends of David Miller gathered to remember the 24-year-old. His parents have said they just want his killers brought to justice. Today's parade on Koh Tao was a demonstration by Thai police that is happening. The 2 men bowing their heads as an act of contrition after a quiet word and a tap on the shoulder. Duncan Golestani, ITV News.
A former News of the World news editor has been warned he could face jail after admitting involvement in phone hacking. Ian Edmondson pleaded guilty to conspiring with private detective Glenn Mulcaire. Victims included Lord Prescott, actress Sienna Miller and Sir Paul McCartney.
A former policeman accused of murdering robbery suspect Azelle Rodney in 2005 has been named for the first time. Specialist firearms officer Anthony Long will go on trial next June. Mr. Rodney was shot 6 times after the car he was travelling in was pulled over by police.
Now, the student leaders of the democracy demonstrations in Hong Kong have postponed talks with the government. Earlier, the protesters had clashed with pro-Chinese activists and accused the police of failing to protect them. Our China correspondent Lucy Watson has the latest from Hong Kong.
It was a tinderbox in the heart of Hong Kong's shopping area. The youth who crave democracy were confronted with fury from others in this city who want their streets back. Our cops are world class, she says, but when they fired tear gas at the students, they didn't use enough. Clear out, yelled the people against the pro-democracy movement as they tore down the tents. And one by one, they disappeared. This was the people against the people, face to face, while police tried to maintain order.
Obviously, it would be good if everyone calmed down, but both have very strong views, so it's very difficult for us.
The leader of Hong Kong has described this as anarchy and blames the students. But they nervously held their line, all day and night, surrounding the last structure standing.
Throughout the day, these skirmishes have been escalating because the people on this side want to get back to business, and that means taking this tent down. The tension has been building all day. Why don't you just take the tent down now?
This is our side for our hope for real democracy. We won't let those people just take us away.
Hold the fort, the students shout, hold the fort. Because they believe this violence was engineered by the government and police should be held responsible. The so-called umbrella revolution is under pressure and their peaceful plans in chaos. Lucy Watson, ITV News, Hong Kong.
Well, still to come, hounded out over a number plate, why the BBC's Top Gear is in trouble yet again.
And meet Mr. September, an unlikely star of Britain's dullest calendar.
Now, regular drinkers who sink a few glasses of wine or 3 beers a night are set to be offered a new pill to suppress their cravings for alcohol.
Experts say it could save nearly 2,000 lives a year. It's now been approved by the health watchdog for England and Wales. Our consumer editor, Chris Choi, has been looking at whether it's the answer to drink-related problems.
For millions, it's another Friday night in the pub. But for those who develop a problem, health officials are recommending a drug shown to reduce the desire to drink. One of the first in Britain to try it was Stephen Orker.
The effects were instant. I took the medication as prescribed 1 hour before I anticipated I'd need to have a drink. I have now got total control of the alcohol rather than the alcohol got control of me.
The drug, nalmefene, will be offered to women who consume 5 units of alcohol a day, the equivalent of half a bottle of wine, and men who drink 7.5 units, about 3 pints a day. It would cost up to £3 a day per user, and more than 500,000 could be eligible. In trials, drinking was cut by more than 60%. This is the doctor that led the drug's development. He says it works by switching off receptors in the brain that register our enjoyment of alcohol.
If we're talking about pills for 600,000, we're talking about a considerable cost for an NHS already straining.
It's not cheap for people to develop sort of middle-aged, middle-class liver failure. Liver failure is not pretty, whoever you are. And at the moment, we're not doing enough to help people prevent that.
This is Drink Coach.
This expert fears the pills will hit a big problem. Officials say they only work in conjunction with counselling, and without a large injection of money, it simply won't be there.
There wouldn't be the resources in alcohol services countrywide to address that today. However, if investment was put in place and the counsellors were hired or funding was made available, then that would be able to be coped with.
Pitched against drinks promotions and social pressures that boost the desire for booze, this little pill that does the opposite has a very big workload. Chris Choi, ITV News.
The BBC's Top Gear programme is in trouble again, this time over a car number plate used while filming in Argentina. Locals thought it referred to the Falklands War, and their protests have forced the presenters and film crew to leave the country. Martha Fairley has the details.
It was supposed to be a Top Gear road trip along Argentina's Route 40, the Patagonian highway. But this controversial number plate on a Porsche driven by presenter Jeremy Clarkson has led to filming being cut short and angry protests from locals. They claim the plate H982FKL was a provocative reference to the 1982 Falklands War between Britain and Argentina. The Top Gear vehicles were later pelted with stones by an angry group of Argentine war veterans. The crew and presenters are understood to have been escorted to the airport and have left the country. In a statement, the programme's executive producer Andy Willman denied they deliberately picked the number plate, saying Top Gear production purchased 3 cars for a forthcoming programme. To suggest that this car was either chosen for its number plate or that an alternative number plate was substituted for the original is completely untrue.
That I'm sitting here begging your forgiveness for the fact that obviously my efforts weren't quite good enough.
Jeremy Clarkson admitted earlier this year he's on his last warning with the BBC after using racist language. But tonight it appears, despite his efforts to steer clear of controversy, he's run into trouble once again. Martha Fairley, ITV News.
A man who claimed he had made a detector that could track down Madeleine McCann has been jailed for 3.5 years. 68-year-old Sam Tree from Bedfordshire marketed the devices around the world by claiming they could detect explosives, drugs and people, including the missing little girl.
This year, so far, is the hottest on record in Britain. Met Office figures show every month, bar one, has been warmer than expected for this time of year. The average temperature between January and September was 10.6 degrees.
And it's been revealed that Margaret Thatcher had to rip up one of her most hard-hitting speeches in the wake of the Brighton bomb in 1984. Files released today show the Prime Minister planned to launch a scathing attack on the Labour Party over its support of striking miners.
And finally, they are some of the dullest men in Britain, the most unlikely of pin-ups. They include an avid collector of bricks, and a drain spotter.
Why are you looking at me? Bricks. And their mundane new calendar could well become a bestseller. The Dull Men's Club, it seems, are the new calendar girls. Damon Green, who is really interesting, has been to meet them.
What we got now? This one, Whitehaven, we got from a beach in Cumbria.
Bricks. Neil can't get enough of bricks. Since his retirement in 1989, this former mine worker from Wakefield has been obsessed by bricks. Bricks. Hundreds of bricks. And more bricks.
Which would you say is your favourite?
Favourite brick? I would say this one. It's made by Armitages, which had a brickworks only a couple of miles away from here. And in 1953 they made a commemorative brick for the Queen's coronation. How many of those are there about?
Next year, Neil becomes a pin-up for brick enthusiasts everywhere after being named Mr. September on the calendar of the Dull Men's Society. His wife of 56 years still loves him, and she's even got used to the bricks.
Well, at first, when he first built them home, I thought, what on earth are you going to do with those, you know? And he just said, I'll find something. Then he came back next day with some more, you know.
But when it comes to treating a lady right, move over for Mr. February, Ken McCoy from Leeds, who sent his wife Val the same Valentine's card every year since 1979 and has no plans to stop doing so.
That's filled up, and the back's filled up. But then I make the great discovery, you see, here. I've got all that to go now. That can take me, for, I think, another 150 years, so.
Men who like traffic cones, men with a thing for milk bottles, men who get excited by roundabouts. These are the heroes of dull men everywhere. Neil and your collection of bricks, we salute you. Damon Green, ITV News, in West Yorkshire.
Coming up on tonight's ITV News at 10, why the boss of John Lewis has had to apologise to the French.
And if you go down to the woods this weekend, we have some worrying facts about the number of people poisoned by wild mushrooms.
Join us both again later, but for now, bye-bye.
Have a good evening.